Good afternoon. My name is J.Speedy, and this is my week 1 presentation on my dissertation, which is covering warning behaviors and pathway steps of contemporary mass school shooters. So this presentation will cover my rationale for research, overview of the literature to include any gaps therein, as well as my research questions and proposed methodology. While mass school shootings have occurred for centuries, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold's actions at Columbine High School in 1999 set the stage for future attacks. Since their attack, school shootings have become deadlier and more frequent, according to the Violence Project Mass Shooter Database 2020. 6 out of 10 of the most fatal school shootings in the United States have occurred in the last 15 years, dating back to Virginia Tech with 33 killed in 2005, Sandy Hook with 27 killed in 2012, Robb Elementary School with 21 killed just this past year, Parkland with 17 killed 2018, Santa Fe High School with 10 killed in 2018, Umpqua Community College with 9 killed in 2015, and Red Lake, Minnesota with 9 killed in 2005. All of these deaths have totaled over 100. Therefore, we have this trajectory of increasing death in environments for which we expect our children and our young adults to learn and develop safely. In response to this problem, there's been a surge in zero tolerance policies regarding weapons and threats at school. Active shooter drills are common. Metal detectors, cameras, locking security door, clear backpacks, those are all steps taken to improve safety of our schools. Gun legislation has cycled through waves of restriction and relaxation in response to this problem. Yet the shooters still find loopholes in gun control laws. They ignore zero tolerance policies. They shoot through glass windows and they shoot at armed security guards. They don't care about the cameras. They don't care about the metal detectors. They will do what they need to do to get to their targets. And additionally, they've run the same active shooter drills that their targets have because they are often students or former students themselves. So using theoretical frameworks such as Malloy's warning behavior typology from 2012 of targeted violence and Calhoun and Weston's pathway of intended violence from 2003 to retroactively analyze previous mass school shooters, detectable patterns emerge that could enable threat assessors, school faculty, or even other students and adults to recognize warning behaviors in others who may be headed down the path of violence. If these behaviors can be recognized and intervened upon, this provides promising potential to prevent further mass shootings. But this leads to our problem statement. The general problem being the lack of studies concerning the efficacy of these typologies for contemporary mass school shooters. Those who perpetuated their violence in the last decade, as well as the limitation of studies that compare most commonly identifiable behaviors among contemporary mass school shooters. For example, do most of them exhibit leakage? At what step of the pathway to violence are their actions most easily observed by others? And so on and so forth. Recognize there's this lack of effective prevention strategies in regard to mass school shooters, giving rise to the argument that threat assessments present the best hope for preventing future incidents of violence. Using Malloy's warning behavior typology as well as Calhoun and Weston's path to intended violence typology, researchers can develop threat assessments around identifying observable patterns of behavior that perpetrators exhibit prior to their violent acts. However, there is a substantial lack of literature in which these typologies are applied to contemporary school shooters, as in school shootings that have happened since 2012. This literature review demonstrates the lack of contemporary studies using these theoretical frameworks and a need for threat assessment approaches in our prevention strategies. Through my review of the literature, I was able to look at conceptual frameworks, including the two that I've talked about, Malloy's typology and Calhoun and Weston's typology, as well as alternative typologies. These are namely motivational based. They are behavioral based, some of them. Also, there are alternative prevention strategies that I looked at through the literature, including hardening school targets, as in adding security guards or security measures. Looked at bullying, answering bullying, and social isolation as well. And I looked at misconceptions and then the efficacy of threat assessment through this literature review. And then there were many, many case studies that were reviewed as well. Overall, the literature review has this prevailing theme that threat assessment is our best option for prevention. Because the other alternatives in prevention and the other typologies in the literature review really demonstrate this this lack of predictive prowess. And therefore, we see this gap opening up in the literature because there are very few studies on recent school mass shooters. I've located 2 articles that applied Calhoun and Weston's typology to the Isla Vista shooter and the Parkland shooter each. However, beyond these 2 articles, other articles on the topic of mass school shooters either apply different theoretical frameworks or use the incident as a reason for more gun control. Granted, Malloy has applied his typology to some school mass shooters to illustrate specific behaviors or his typology, but he has not analyzed the school mass shooters in depth with his typology. Additionally, his typology was constructed before the contemporary school mass shootings, just as Calhoun and Weston's were. Therefore, the distinct lack of literature qualitatively analyzing contemporary school mass school shooters in light of the discussed typologies limits our ability to apply those typologies. Into my research questions and hypotheses. Using Malloy's warning behavior typology and Calhoun and Weston's pathway to violence typology as theoretical frameworks, can such typologies be applied to modern mass school shooters? If so, what warning behaviors were most commonly represented among the current shooters? What did each shooter's pathway to violence look like based on Calhoun and Weston's typology? Based on those questions, I have 3 hypotheses. Hypothesis number 1, both typologies will generally still be relevant to contemporary mass school shooters. Number 2 is certain warning behaviors will be more commonly shared among contemporary shooters such as leakage. And the final one is contemporary mass school shooters will share common pathway traits. Now, in discussing the proposed methodology, my dissertation will be a qualitative and archival research design, using data from archived sources like court documents, diaries and manifestos, biographies, documentaries, and news stories, to try and apply qualitative variables to each perpetrator. Malloy's warning behavior typology consists of 8 identifiable behaviors that the perpetrators demonstrate as they plan an attack of intended violence. These behaviors present the opportunity for intervention and prevention in a threat assessment model. Similarly, Calhoun and Weston's typology identified steps each perpetrator takes as they move closer to their intended violence, allowing for intervention and prevention in a threat assessment model as well. The variables in the study will include both the 8 warning behaviors as well as the pathway steps in each typology. As done in peer-reviewed articles such as The Warning Behaviors of Anders Breivik by Malloy, Habermeyer, and Gildeman, 2015. Path to Intended Violence Model to Understand Mass Violence in the Case of Elliot Rodger, Aleli and Ficini, 2017. And The Parkland Mass Shooting and the Path to Intended Violence, a Case Study of Missed Opportunities and Avenues for Future Prevention by Schildkraut, Cohen, and Mosher, 2022. Archival data will be applied to determine whether the perpetrators exhibit the variables. Additionally, the study will address how the variables apply. And due to the archival nature of the study, there are no participants. Rather than participants, there are 8 subjects who will be studied. 2 of the 8 are still alive and apprehended. 1 was apprehended and sentenced but later died in prison. The other 5 were deceased immediately after their shootings, either suicide or killed by police. And in honor to the No Notoriety campaign started by the surviving parents of one of the Aurora, Colorado shooting victims, the offenders will not be named in this study. The intention of the campaign is to limit the fame that perpetrators of mass shootings receive for their actions by reducing gratuitous use of their names and likeness and focus instead on the survivors. For this reason, well-known monikers such as Parkland Shooter will be used rather than the offender's name in my dissertation. And a note on this, unfortunately, there was a very recent mass school shooting in Uvalde. I do not believe I will have enough information on that perpetrator by the time this dissertation is due in order to include him in my study. But I do recognize that he would be a part of this study as he would be a contemporary mass school shooter. So on to my variables. The pathway warning behavior is derived from Calhoun and Weston's typology. As such, the steps in Calhoun and Weston's pathway to intended violence overlap with Malloy's typology on 2 steps: research planning and preparation. Overall pathway behavior is any behavior involved in research, planning, or preparation of a targeted attack. This behavior can manifest in many ways, such as researching mass murder events, writing plans in a manifesto, or even purchasing supplies for an attack. As it relates to Calhoun and Weston's pathway to intended violence, this step is often the easiest to identify due to the latent nature of planning behaviors, according to Schildkraut, Cohen, and Mosher, 2022. Grievance and ideation are the first 2 steps in Calhoun and Weston's typology and deal with the overarching concept of fixation in Malloy's typology. The grievance a perpetrator experiences can be any perceived injustice or need for fame. When the perpetrator fixates on the grievance in a pathological fashion, this is considered ideation and progresses the perpetrator another step toward targeted violence. This behavior is often accompanied by undertones of intense emotions and lends to a deterioration in the social life of the perpetrator. This warning behavior is characterized by the desire to be pseudo-commando, and that's the identification warning behavior. This can also be somebody having a warrior mentality, as demonstrated through an association to weaponry, military, law enforcement, or even previous attackers. A common identification warning behavior among school mass shooters is in the contemporary age include fixation on the Columbine shooting, according to Langman 2020. This is often a visible warning behavior that can be observed by anyone who interacts with the perpetrators on a regular basis. Leakage warning behavior is the most salient warning behavior, and it involves the perpetrator communicating to a third party of his or her impending violence. As discussed in the literature review and introductory remarks, this warning behavior is present in over half of the mass school shootings. This is an important warning behavior to analyze because it means the perpetrator has made mention of his plans to others. There are many examples of this in mass murder cases, such as the Heath High School shooter who warned his friends to stay clear of the school lobby on a specific day and time, or one of the Columbine shooters turning in a school assignment about a man who kills a group of students a few weeks prior to the attack. Next, we have the novel aggression warning behavior. This warning behavior and the energy burst warning behavior are related to Calhoun and Weston's breach step, which is discussed in a couple of slides, wherein the subjects engage in violence unrelated to the intended attack for the purpose of testing his or her own ability to engage in that violence. This might look like killing one's parents before engaging in a mass school shooting the following day, or attempting to shove partygoers off a ledge a week prior to engaging in a campus shooting. Energy burst warning behavior is perhaps the most obscure warning behavior. It's characterized by an increase of activities related to the impending attack. A visual exemplification of this can be observed in the hotel surveillance videos of the Las Vegas shooter taking multiple trips and hauling many suitcases in and out of his hotel room just prior to the attack on Route 91 Harvest Music Festival in 2017. This picture on here is actually that shooter, and I got that from NBC News. The link will be in my comment. Last resort warning behavior ushers in urgency when assessing a threat. Because this behavior is characterized by increased distress and desperation on behalf of the perpetrator, The perpetrator feels there is no alternative choice than to react violently. A perfect example of this warning behavior was when the ESL mass shooter was served a restraining order for his obsession and stalking of fellow employee Laura Black. Upon receipt of the restraining order, the shooter felt it was an act of ultimate abandonment and realized Black would never agree to date him, leaving him no choice but to exact a terrible revenge, according to Greenwood Publishing Group, 1997. Breach step in the Calhoun and Weston's pathway model may involve the perpetrator conducting dry runs to test security at their targeted locations. And just like the warning behavior discussed below, this means violence is imminent. Which leads us to directly communicated threat warning behavior and attack step. The explicit expression of intent to injure or kill targets constitutes that direct threat warning behavior, while the attack step is marked by the implementation of the perpetrator's plans. Based on the literature review, the frequency of this warning behavior is ambiguous, and that is in, oh, I'm sorry, it already skipped. That would be in regards to the direct threat warning behavior. So now we're on to the offenders. Again, there's no participants, but there are 8 offenders that will be studied. This one is the Santa Fe High School shooter, May 2018. He was 17 years old. He was a student. He killed 8 students and 2 staff members. He surrendered to police, and he's still awaiting trial. He has been deemed incompetent to stand trial. And then he was just recently deemed incompetent again in February, and will wait another year to see if he can stand trial for his crimes. Next, we have the Parkland shooter. He was also from 2018. It was February. He's 19 years old. He was a previous student. He killed 14 students and 3 staff, surrendered to police. He pled guilty and is awaiting sentencing. I do believe they just got the jury members for his sentencing yesterday. Next, we have the Umpqua Community College shooter, or the UCC shooter. He instituted his violence in October 2015. He was 26 years old and was a student of the college. He killed 8 students and 1 staff member and committed suicide on scene after police injured him. Next, we have Marysville-Pilchuck High School shooter from October 2014. He was a freshman. He was a student. 15 years old. He killed 4 students and then committed suicide on scene. He did also injure another student that he had attempted to kill. This is the Isla Vista shooter from May 2014. He was a student at UC Santa Barbara. 22 years old. He killed 6 students and committed suicide on scene after being injured by police. This is the Santa Monica shooter from June 2013. He was a previous student of Santa Monica Community College. He killed 5 people in total, and he was killed by police on scene. The Sandy Hook shooter from December 2012 was a previous student of the elementary school. He was 20 years old. He killed 20 students and 6 staff members. He committed suicide on scene. And our final offender is the Oikos University shooter from April 2012. He was a student, 43 years old. He killed 6 students, all of them female, and 1 staff member. He did surrender to police and was sentenced to life with no possibility of parole, but he did pass away while incarcerated in 2019. I have been unable to find out any reason why he passed away. It is also interesting to note that he was deemed incompetent to stand trial, and his trial had been delayed for a while before they sentenced him. So thank you. For my references, including the ones I verbalized, and then there's some that I didn't verbalize, please review my discussion post on the page. It should all be there in APA format. And if you have any questions, I look forward to interacting with you. Thank you for sitting through my presentation.